The Citizen Mike Show. News. Commentary. Interviews. The Citizen Mike Show starts now.
Welcome to the Citizen Mike Show. Thanks for tuning in. We do appreciate it. My name is Mike Brudzinski. On my right, the editor of the Record Journal, Ralph Tomaselli, and a special guest on set on the Citizen Mike Show. He is a teacher at Mark T. Sheehan High School, Matt Altieri. Matt, thanks for coming on the Citizen Mike Show.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
All right, we're gonna have some fun. I want the viewers to get to know you a little bit. You've been teaching at Mark T. Sheehan for a while. How long? What have you been teaching?
Okay, I've been a teacher at Sheehan since 2002. I've been the baseball coach there since 1995. So I live in Cheshire. It was kind of a better fit for me. And so previous to that, for 18 years, I was at Guilford High School. I teach, at the current time, I teach AP Government and Politics, which I really enjoy. And U.S. History, I also enjoy that. But the Government and Politics is a lot of fun for me.
Which fits right in with kind of what this show is all about.
Certainly.
Some introductory comments that I have. I mean, we're gonna get to, well, let's get to the big question now. The whole reason why you really came on the show, the fundamental thing everyone wants to know about is next year who's going to win Powder Puff.
Now that is the crown jewel of Wallingford, and you know it as well as I do.
Well, that's why you're here. We got into
that. I hope Sheehan does. I've always rooted for the girls. I've always thought it was a great event for the girls, but we're hoping that we can break, I think, a 2-year streak of losing to Lyman Hall.
All right, whatever. So, more seriously, you and I, Ralph, and our guests over the past years, we've talked a lot about education. We've had Board of Ed members on. We've had Sal Benzo on a couple of times, and more recently, we brought up the education system because of the school renovation plan. So we wanted to get just a different perspective, someone from outside government, just to sort of chat about a whole wide range of stuff, and that's why we invited Matt on. A bit of a disclaimer. Matt is here representing himself only. His views are his own. He doesn't represent the teachers, the union, the administration, the principal. It's he's sort of out on the limb. Our job is to cut it off, right?
Yeah.
That's yeah. I guess I have to be mindful as the host and producer of the Citizen Mike Show that Matt is also an employee of the school system. He's got a principal who's a boss, a board of ed is a boss, Dr. Menzo is a boss. And so there may be, I don't know, there may be some professional boundaries that he can't cross. But that just makes the show more fun, right?
Sure.
That just, let's get into some substance. And so not knowing that the Hartford Courant was going to run this editorial on the front page of their Insight section, which is their editorial page, not knowing that when we scheduled Matt Altieri for the Citizen Mike Show, up pops this op-ed written by a guy called Gary Carlson. He is an English professor at Norwalk Community College. He says he taught there since 1997, but he also taught at other colleges, Quinnipiac, UNH, Gateway, so on and so forth. The title of the op-ed, it has a lot of stuff I want to talk to you guys about, is Self-Esteem is No Substitute for Old School Education. It starts off this way. Public education, Gary Carlson writes, is a mess. Most of us know this, and most of us know why. Anarchy reigns supreme today in classrooms where words such as discipline, consequences, homework, and failure are no longer deemed acceptable. They've been replaced by progressive buzzwords such as self-esteem, diversity, inclusiveness, and student-centered education. I'm skipping now. Oh, he says, graduation rates continue to rise, as do the number of students who enroll in colleges. Unfortunately, an ever-increasing number of students are woefully underprepared for college and end up either taking remedial courses or dropping out. However, for the past 8 years or so, the number of incoming students are shockingly, he says, unprepared for the college level and for life, and that seems to be an increasing trend. Skipping, failure is something that they have not allowed to experience. These are students he's talking about now. Failure is something that students have not been allowed to experience, at least not in the classroom. This is what is wrong with public education today. And he goes on and he writes about the value of, if you don't deserve a passing grade, you don't get a deserving grade. He calls it teacher failure. We're coming to the end, but just bear with me, and then we're going to go to Matt. For 50 years now, urged along by every corner of society, our schools have abandoned most of what demonstrably has worked for what obviously has not worked. Rebranding over and over again the same tired ideas of student-centered learning, positive-only reinforcement, group work, teachers as facilitators, and the wonders of technology, always with fresh assurances that this time they really will bear wonderful fruit. Education today is too much like politics, he says, and students have been taught to feel good about themselves. That seems to be a culture. He spends some time on that. So he says, unless we do something about our public education system, something such as once again making demands of our students, having reasonable expectations of them, and embracing the value of earned rewards and punishments, he says things are only going to get worse. Matt.
Wow.
Where do you agree? Where do you disagree?
Oh, well, there's so much
Take it
to
one at a
unpack
time,
there.
and we'll break it down.
All right. Here's my initial thought when I read that, and I read it a couple of times because I just wanted to make sure I understood him. My first impression is as a community college a professor of English, which has got to be a very, very difficult job, I think he's probably not seeing, and I'm not trying to cast aspersions, he's probably not seeing the top end of high school graduates. He's probably seeing the middle to lower end. So I can see where he may be that frustrated. I think where he overstates his case is he talks about anarchy in the classroom. I think that's completely wrong. There is no anarchy in classrooms in Wallingford and I think across the nation. Where he does have a point, and where many teachers would agree with him, would be this, is that we don't often allow students to honestly fail a class or an assignment or something like that. And we don't often allow students to kind of, let consequences for their actions be. I think we do in this age of education. We're constantly, I guess, putting hammocks and safety nets under kids so they don't fall, because we don't want to see them with disappointed looks on their faces and what have you. And maybe it's even a reflection on us that we didn't do enough. But I do believe the way I was raised, the way you guys were probably raised, is that our parents did sometimes allow us to fail. And he's right, that we probably don't do enough to allow kids to, and I call safely fail, get back up and dust themselves off and move on. That's the part I do agree with.
There was a couple of paragraphs in here where Gary Carlson seemed to be criticizing the latest developments, the latest swings, the latest trends in education.
Yeah.
Your thoughts on that point?
Yeah, I think that we have become way too faddish. That's certainly my point of view.
Now, what do you mean by faddish?
I
And give
think
us some examples.
what happens is that, and I'll relate it to probably anybody's professional development, whether it's medical professional development or what my friends in corporate talk about. The latest idea that comes up, a new professor, a new generator of ideas comes forward with a panacea of how to teach a class or how to discipline, whatever it happens to be. And what happens is that we're not skeptical in education when these things come forward. I think that we're too quick to jump on them and say, oh, this sounds great, and then move forward on them. And then we move forward like a couple of weeks or a couple of months or a couple of years, and we're like, boy, this is not working. This isn't working like they said it was. And it's academic, it's disciplinarian, and it's all of those things. And there's a cottage industry out there from people from Reeve to Marzano and people like that who are trying to teach quote unquote best practices. Some of them are actually pretty good and you can adopt them. But some, you look at them right from the get-go and you're like, this is not going to work. This doesn't make any sense. So that's where I would say that goes.
Ralph, I want to get your reaction after I review quickly some letters to the editor that came into the Hartford Courant after this piece appeared on Sunday. And boy, the writers must have been right on it, because this thing appeared on Sunday and the letters were published on Tuesday, or maybe it was today. So here's one. I'm just reading a part of it. From a lady in East Hampton. It reads in part, it is increasingly difficult to educate children and teens when they are given the impression that they are special in every way and therefore not subject to correction or, heaven forbid, guilt. Academic leaders and parents need to wake up. Steady work with the occasional failure will build character. When our children have put in the effort to achieve character by demonstrating accountability and responsibility, they will already have self-esteem. Sound like an overstatement to you? Or, I mean, it did make it to the letter of the editor's page, in the...
Sounds like what I think of when I hear that letter is that the good old days weren't all good. I mean, for anybody who grew up when I did, bullying was commonplace. Fights were commonplace.
Okay.
Marijuana was smoked very openly at school.
Seriously?
Right. So
I went to the wrong
and
school.
I can't underestimate the number of
I
fights.
don't know how that happened.
The average, I assume I was
Yeah.
a typical male of my period. I mean, there were just knockdown, drag-out fights on a regular basis. Bullying was not something that anybody would think to complain about. In fact, if you complained about being bullied to your father, as I did, I was told to punch the bully in the nose next time it happened. So, which was not going to stop bullying or so that's just a quick example of, I get where she's coming from, but I think you have to take a minute and say that the good old days weren't perfect either, nor are modern times anarchy reigning. So somewhere in the middle.
Okay.
Okay.
I got one more.
Okay.
I got a couple more letters, and this I'm going to go to Matt first off. Another letter says in part, Gary Carlson's articulate censure of public education is spot on. The past 50 years have indeed seen the disintegration and eventual death of former values. And this was a teacher, he goes on to say, but interest of time, I can't read it all. My teaching career in public education was one of the greatest joys of my life. How heartbreaking that I am now ashamed of the status of my beloved profession. Uh-oh. Is this an overstatement here?
Yeah, I think so. I mean,
Okay.
I guess I can speak from my point of view, obviously, and the school that I teach at. But to be ashamed, I don't think we're ashamed. I think the idea of consequences and things like that I spoke of before, but that is way overstated, the idea that we should be ashamed of the profession, that it's gotten that far off track. It has gotten off track in some aspects, but I'd really have to disagree with that characterization.
So I got two more, Matt, and go to you first and then to Ralph. And this appeared today. The other two were yesterday. Again, I'm not reading the whole letter. This writer says there is no evidence that higher teacher salaries and more educational fads and top-heavy administrators would improve anything other than the pocketbooks of education industry bigwigs. As every teacher knows, parental attitude is the single most important determinant of school success. Total facilitation, and this is a criticism of what the writer perceives as a prevailing culture at a school system, at least he is familiar with. Total facilitation has never facilitated anything. The education industry today is geared to numbers, not quality. Its leaders are hardly educators. They are politicians with PhDs. I shudder to think that I almost became a teacher. And then the last letter This is Gary Carlson might be shocked. The writer says, Gary Carlson might be shocked by the number of times I hear the school's grading system is hurting my child's chance to get into an Ivy League school. A parental attitude that is very difficult for public school educators to counteract. Matt, your thoughts?
Well, he's mixing a lot of things in there, which I think I find disturbing. The idea that we're making more money and we're not getting the results that they want, is. I understand where he's coming from, but I just think that how much money I make versus how student achievement and stuff, I really.
I'm not sure he's
disagree with
talking about teachers, at least in context. I would never consider a teacher the education
You're talking
industry
about
bigwig. I think he's
administrators or-
consultants.
Superintendents?
Those making more than 150 or something. 150,000. I think that's.
Here's where I do think, and this is one of the things that I think is, if you're going to ask me eventually what's different.
Yeah.
This is what's different, I think, is once teachers and the Enhancement Act came in, you saw the testing regimes come right beside it. And why? Because the public was kind of saying, all right, we're going to pay you more, but we want to see the results. Unfortunately,
It's not a fair exchange.
it is somewhat, because I obviously was going to be working hard no matter if I was making the starting salary I did back when I started, which was like $14,000 or something like that, or what I'm making now. The important thing is that it can't be tied directly, and this is what teachers really resented when that whole, all the testing regime came in, which was basically trying to tie our salaries to a test score. And the idea that the gentleman put forward was this. Remember that it was parents. That if you have two parents who love each other and love their kids, that's an unbeatable combination. I can turn out test scores like it's going out of style if you give every single kid who takes up a seat in my classroom that particular background. But that's not the reality of education these days. So I think that what that gentleman was trying to say, if it was a gentleman, I can't agree with all that was there.
Ralph.
Well, I've been in journalism almost 34 years now, so I saw the emergence of the testing regime. All of a sudden, elected officials, mostly not Board of Education members, were griping about test scores in the context and mingling them with school budgets. And it just, I watched it from the outset, and it seemed to me that it was elected leaders who really knew very little about education or didn't take the time to drill down on the school system. And a lot of them, quite frankly, would have trouble passing basic tests themselves if they were given. So I saw the beginning of this testing regime, and it just, I thought it was on the wrong track from the start.
Ralph.
Yes.
As you frequently do on the Citizen Mike Show, you force me into a corner where someone has to be the devil's advocate, and I'm the only
devil's
guy
advocate.
left. I'm the only guy left.
I like that. Go ahead.
Whether or not I believe it, I think it's more nuanced. I mean, I think it's got to be. There's such a thing as accountability, and that's a fair concept. Accountability of the school system, the superintendents, and the teacher corps. And I think parents above all, probably, but taxpayers too, they want to know if we're throwing good money after bad. Are we making the system better, or we're making it worse? How do we gauge the progress of our students? There's many answers. One is no fair. You can't do that. Accountability is something we're going to fight you tooth and nail on. Don't test my kid. Don't test the student body. Don't have a strong evaluations of the teacher corps. The Board of Ed. They're always going to give themselves glowing grades. So, testing is a way of measurement. If you're doing a good job, you should not be afraid of measuring, as long as you know what you're doing when you do that, because measurements have to be in context. And if you balance that against, I think, something everyone agrees with now, and that was in this letter to the editor, that the single most important determinant of student success is home life, the home socioeconomic background. So that's my pitch, sort of. Don't be too tough on I took tests, you took tests.
Right.
I mean, Matt, your reaction to my reaction.
Yeah, I would say this. When the testing regime came in and we had cap testing.
What is the
which was-
testing regime?
Well, the testing
What is that?
regime in the beginning was the cap test that was state driven. And it basically would measure a student's ability and achievement in science and math and English.
We want to make sure our viewers are all on the same page. What grade would this be?
They started it in, like, back then it was in 4th grade, and then it was in 6th grade, it was in 8th grade, and then it was in 10th grade.
Okay.
But it was state driven. It was more homegrown.
Yeah.
Then when No Child Left Behind came along and the Every Student Succeeds, they went to SBAC testing, which was the Bill Gates driven, the governor's driven test in which they were going to align it with Common Core standards. Remember those that all states but like 5 adopted them. And what happened is that when the kids began to take these SBAC tests, Mike, the big thing that all of us as teachers had to address, and the administration sometimes probably didn't want us to address it this way. The first thing the student said is, does this count? Is this going in the grade book? And we had to say no. Well, what do you think the students did with that test? They basically went downstairs, took the test, basically didn't put their best effort forward, and then we're going to be held accountable for that? So the point of all of us as teachers was SBAC and all of that kind of stuff just got out of control very, very fast. It wasn't measuring what it was supposed to measure. It cost the towns and cities across America billions of dollars to do the adaptive stuff with the computers. And then you want to say we have to be accountable. Accountable for what? And they wouldn't even give you like your test scores. They wouldn't share them with us and stuff because they didn't have it back in time. So
This is still going on, is it?
Well,
not?
not at the high school level because
Okay.
Connecticut got opted out probably because of the Malloy and Obama thing, that now we just use SAT scores, which is a more reasonable test, and the kids do get after it because they know it has some bearing. But when I spoke out, and it ended up in the record journal, and I said that I thought the whole testing thing was basically not a good idea, and many of my colleagues back me up. But that's what I think when you say accountability in a fair way, in a way that's really measurable. SBAC wasn't.
Let's talk about test scores because it's a big thing. Wallingford test scores have gone down 2 years in a row, not by a lot, but they still went down. That pops up every so often in conversations when people talk about financing the public schools. Is that a fair for someone out in the public to comment on test scores?
Well, like you said, it is nuanced. So I certainly don't begrudge anybody making a comment on a test score. But what I'd have to know, for example, I'd have to know, even as a journalist, I don't know if I know enough about the test, the group of students whose score went down. And when I say I have to know about the test, I mean, is it possible that the test has gotten harder over the years? Is that why? So I'd have to know a lot more about a test to make blanket statements about a school system.
So because test scores end up in the newspapers,
Yes.
this is for Matt, for you. What should education leaders say? Should they be brutally honest as you were 4 minutes ago, or is that get you in trouble with the state, the Department of Education? I mean, if the testing process is whodunk, then say it's whodunk. I mean, I don't pay that much attention to it.
There was one person who did say it's whodunk.
Uh-oh.
And he was the superintendent in Madison, Connecticut.
What happened?
Well, from what I heard, and he was I kind of knew him because he was a principal and an administrator in Cheshire.
Yeah.
And he knew my nephew. I think he was one of the elementary school principals. Tom, I can't remember, Scalise. So he spoke out. He wrote editorials. From what I heard, and I can't confirm this, is that the State Department of Education kind of came down and met with him. And he basically just ran them down. He basically stood up for all of us who were saying this whole testing scheme. Now, he still got a job. But a lot of us also said, well, that might be easy for you to say, Tom, because you're superintendent in Madison, Connecticut, which is probably one of the most high-income, high-achieving towns in Connecticut. But I would say follow his lead. If you think that this is not good for your students, you have an obligation to step forward and say, I think that this is something that we should, consider seriously, or what have you, speaking truth to power. I can't say why a superintendent might not want to do that. I can only assume that they either agree with it or they don't want to speak out because they don't want to, incur the wrath of the State Department of
And
Education.
it's probably a 1 week news cycle anyway.
Right.
Tom Scarice was his name. Tom Scarice.
Yeah. So if we ask you, and we're going to ask, reviewing your career, 36 years as a teacher, from when you first started to when you're going to finish, maybe the top 3 big changes that you've seen in the education field.
It's not the students. It really isn't. People want to say kids have changed. It is not the students. The students are the same basically as they're interested in different things. I would say special ed, number one. The amount of money we spend on special ed, the amount of paraprofessionals and special ed teachers, the amount of identifying students with learning disabilities or what you want to call intellectual disabilities and stuff like that has been on the increase. It's one of the big drivers. It's salaries and benefits and special ed. That's changed quite a bit. Identifying students who have, and I'm not saying that they don't have needs, and I'm not saying that, I follow IEPs and, I'll go on the record right here. I never not followed an IEP. Number 2, I would say parents.
IEP, once you translate that.
Individual education plan. Once
Good
you
enough.
identify somebody who has certain intellectual disabilities, academic disabilities, a group of parents and teachers, and sometimes the students there, administrators get together. They put together a plan that will modify the students whenever they do an assignment. That'll modify or change, sometimes change the way you process it. More time, less items on the test, whatever happens to be.
Yeah.
And you have to follow that. So that was not a big thing at all when I first started. I mean, it was almost non-existent.
Okay. Number 2.
Number 2, I would say parents have changed. And it's hard to describe the parental change. But we often as teachers, I can't say often, but sometimes we don't feel like we're sitting on the same side of the table with parents. And maybe it's a small percentage of parents, but there's a small percentage of parents that I think don't trust us. They think that we're not doing right by their kid, or we're trying to kind of get one over on their kid, or there's always you feel like there's a hidden agenda there. Now, that's not a majority of parents, but it's a growing minority of parents that I don't feel comfortable with when I'm talking with on the phone, when the first thing they come up with is, why did you do this and how did you do that? And I try to be diplomatic. I try to kind of tone that rhetoric down a little bit. And most of the time, I think, because I'm a professional, I was able to do it.
Before you get to 3,
yeah, go ahead.
Before I want to get Ralph to weigh in, and then I want to address 3 with
All
you.
right.
Well, this is one of those examples where, the good old days probably were better. Because I agree, as a journalist, a parent, myself, as a coach, I saw the change in parenting over the years. And, and in the good old days, the better part of the good old days, I can remember very specifically being told, if you have a problem with a coach or a parent, a coach or a teacher, parents' attitudes was, first of all, they backed the teacher and the coach all the way. And, you were told to work it out. It was never, it was viewed as, it must have been viewed, I wasn't my mother or my father, but it must have been viewed as if you were going to undermine authority outside the house, you were probably going to undermine your own authority inside the house. So teachers and coaches were backed all the way. And that was a better thing about the good old days.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Matt, before you get to number 3, I'm going to throw at you some candidates for the number 3 position for sort of a short
Sure.
answer. See if that's a candidate for the
All right.
third one. Teacher autonomy.
It could be. We have less of it.
What does that mean to you when I use that word?
It means that there are certain things that you used to be able to do in your classroom and have a little more free reign. And now, whether it's the way you teach curriculum, the way you can and can't do discipline, the way you're supposed to administer tests, everything has to be, the common test between the 3 of us if we all teach the same. class. So yeah, the autonomy
Could be a candidate.
It could certainly.
It is a pejorative word, micromanaged?
I don't feel micromanaged. No.
Okay.
Maybe that's because I don't let people micromanage me in any phase of my life, except for maybe my wife. But yeah, I think that may be a little too strong.
Teaching techniques, has that changed? Could that be a candidate for the 3 spot?
It has, but it gets back to my idea of best practices, that sometimes best practices aren't. That there are some times when the stuff we used to do years ago was better, but by the same token, you have to grow as a teacher. So yes, teaching techniques and the way we do professional development.
Which is training, right, in professional development?
Well, it should be.
Okay.
Right, it should be. But oftentimes it's, the problem with professional development now is that it's just, sometimes it's led by people who weren't teachers, or more importantly, that what they're teaching you and what they're showing you hasn't been like road tested yet. This is a great idea. And they show you this great thing you could do. And then when some of us who are old enough to know, don't go to try to pull that off because we know it's not going to work. But we do something similar to that. But yeah, that's part. Sure.
Grading. Gotten looser, stricter, more forgiving, less forgiving?
Well, yes. I mean, one of the things that Professor Carlson was making the point, I do believe that it's harder to give certain kids certain grades because they don't think they deserve that grade.
What's a certain grade you're talking? C minus?
Yeah, could be. I mean, it depends on the student. It depends on the situation. Generally speaking, I tell the kids right from the start, this is how I'm going to grade. You're going to have X percentages tests, X percentages essays, you know what I mean? And I stick to those rules. And if you hand it in late, I have the option of taking 10 points off and things like that. But I'm old school, and maybe because I have a proven track record, I can kind of stick to that. I think my impression is sometimes that younger teachers don't want to be disliked, and therefore they might go the grading stuff that you just said.
Yeah, Ralph.
Well, there are 2 things, and maybe I'll make a point on them, and maybe Matt or you will want to weigh in. But when you talk about changes, 2 things come to mind that I've seen over my career. First of all, obviously technology. And while I'm not a teacher, I marvel at the 20-somethings in my workplace and their ability, their mastering of technology, and not just technology though, because they've dealt with so much technology their whole lives, the way they're able to digest massive amounts of information that make me pause. So in some ways, I think technology has made better workers, and so the other thing is the growth of administration in education. I can remember that when I first started covering a school system, you'd have a superintendent, maybe an assistant superintendent. You had building principals, but the layers of administrators just has. So those are 2 things that have changed over the years.
Matt, what's your thoughts on that? On that
Speaking
point?
of technology,
Yeah.
this to my students, you know what I call it? A weapon of mass distraction.
Oh.
I make my students put away their damn phones as soon as class starts.
Doesn't every teacher?
I can't tell you, but I'm under the impression that, and you've seen the 60 Minutes on the phone, the brain hacking in the phone. In some respects, I don't know. I can tell you what I do. I showed them the brain hacking. You guys have been brain hacked. I can't compete with that phone as your teacher. I could never I'm not the apps. So I make them put the phone away so they are only paying attention with me. And I'm pretty much a bear, and my students will tell you that.
Any pushback?
Of course.
Well, it sounds what I'm hearing, I don't know if this is what you're saying, but what I'm hearing is there isn't a rock solid policy in the school system that no one drags out a phone during class.
Well, even if you had it, Mike, I don't know how you would enforce it, because when a kid does this, what am I supposed to do? Go over and assault him or something? Of course not. So I try to encourage my students 2 ways. Number 1, I'm serious about class. And I want you to put your phone away because I want you to learn. I want you to achieve. I think we got some stuff going on here that you'd be interested in. But number 2, it's not good for you in your personal life to be so addicted to a piece of technology that's not making you any better, any smarter. The people you're working with, Ralph, need the technology to do their jobs better. Our students, yeah, they need it, but at least all of our freshmen have Chromebooks so they can look up things and write things and stuff like that. But the phone is just, like the guy said on 60 Minutes, it's a slot machine for these kids.
Are students better prepared today than they were 30 years ago to face their next step in life, whether it's college, community college, career, military, workforce, whatever?
In some aspects, yes. Sadly, in most aspects,
Just
no.
give us some information on that.
I would say this, and I can only explain it a certain way, and it's pretty simple for me. Because the testing regime came in, we are so focused on the test, and some teachers are so focused on the test, we never get to do the fundamentals anymore. And it's just like I told you before that I related to baseball. I have baseball players show up, they don't know what foot to put forward a ground ball, they don't know how to take a lead and stuff like that. Why? Because all they play are games. That's like all they do are tests. And so what I've always felt is that we need to, this is where the Carlson guy I think might be right, is get back to fundamentals and stop worrying about the test. The test will take care of itself. But I just feel like the unpreparedness is the lack of fundamentals. That's how I see it.
Fundamentals of reading, writing, arithmetic?
Yeah, I do. I think that we sometimes, and I'm not blaming anybody for this. It's a reality. The tests have to be taken, and there's pressure for the tests that, we just discussed this. And so I think sometimes teachers feel the need to head more in the direction of how can I get my kids to do things better on the test, but that means that these certain other fundamental things might not have attention given to. That's been my impression over the past 10 years, 15 years especially.
So there was a meeting, Ralph, that you and I talked about on the Citizen Mike show. The meeting was called to get input and to discuss potential school renovation plans.
Right.
Very well attended. As I say, we covered it on a prior show. And then something remarkable, very remarkable happened. The head of the teachers union, Lou Fiella, got up and made a very noteworthy speech. We have, again, a clip of that speech. Because the audio is so poor, dear viewers, my apologies, but the audio was bad that night. You may have trouble understanding it, but I have a little transcript as to what Lou Fiella said. But again, I think that was the headline news of the night, what he said. And afterwards, Matt, I want to get your reaction to it. What he said in part was over the last 10 years, he's speaking, for teachers, they moved from one scheme or plan or to another with little follow through, running towards the next thing without fully vetting or planning the rollout, whether it's elementary reconfiguration, Common Core, mastery-based learning, personalized learning, capstone mindset, Wallingford 100, STEM Town. He mentioned too many curriculum changes and constant administrative changes. That's what he said. Now, he didn't say this in a quiet corner when no one would listen. He said this in a room full of people looking right at the Board of Education, right at the superintendent and school administrators, and it's for that reason, the context, I want to roll the tape. Bruce, let's hit that 3, 2, 1, go.
I have to speak on behalf of your opinion. I don't want to leave anyone out. Over the last 9 years, we have moved from one initiative to another with little follow-through, running towards the next thing without fully vetting the planning to roll out. Whether it's elementary reconfiguration, Common Core, mastery-based learning, personalized learning, capstone, star interval testing, mindset, Marzano, Wallingford 100, STEM Town, Power School, Watson, and habits of work. Too many curriculum changes to count and constant administrative changes.
Sorry for the audio quality, but your thoughts on Lou Fiella's thoughts?
Well, the applause tells you everything.
Okay.
I think he speaks for a lot of us who feel exactly like he just said. none of those ideas he just threw out in and of themselves are necessary. Some are better than others. But the idea is what I call it's a mile wide and an inch deep. It is a lot of initiatives coming from the administration. And some of them get a lot of attention, some of them get a little bit of attention. But I think, like I told you before, is that they're not well vetted sometimes, and that they're kind of that's the faddish part that I'm talking about, is that we're not looking at each one of those and saying, all right, which one or two or three would work in our school system? Because you can't have that many initiatives and have teachers pay that much attention, give it the attention that it's due. So it's like I always tell them, I got 4 settings at the table. You put a 5th on, I drop one off because I can't do 5. I can only do 4.
So changing the tone and tenor of this deadly serious conversation to something a little more light. Yeah.
Okay.
You're looking at me like, what?
Go ahead.
What?
Yeah, no, what?
And I don't know if this is an appropriate segue, but we're going to go to Matt after I sort of share these little stories, which kind of made me laugh. We'll go to Matt to see if this is an example of one of these sort of flash trends that comes and goes. And it's something maybe called game-based learning. And I have no opinion on game-based learning. I have absolutely no opinion on it.
Sounds good.
Well, it certainly does. And so this is from an article in the Record Journal, December 1.
Oh.
What's the matter?
I don't remember this article.
Well, you don't have to remember this article, but here's how I imagined the article taking place.
Okay.
This is just how I imagined it. It's a fictional reconstruction.
Okay.
This is not true.
All right.
We'll get to the article specifically in a minute. So there was an opportunity for a photo op, a press opportunity in the Wallingford school system. Chris Murphy was visiting a school, and of course the school could manage where he went, what he saw, and who was going to be there. It was presented like hard news, but it was a puff piece, Ralph. I mean, it was a puff piece. So Chris Murphy shows up at Dag Hammarskjöld.
Right.
Who pops up at Roxanne McKay?
Now I recall.
Totally spontaneously, believe it or not. You know, she's a chairlady of the Board of Ed. And here's the lead sentence. Then I've got another Hartford Current article, which is similar. Dateline Wallingford, a group of 7th graders were building wind-powered cars out of Legos and taped paper sails at Dag Hammarskjöld Middle School on Friday when U.S. Senator Chris Murphy visited their classroom. Just coincidence, right? The student, right? I mean, it was a call, a tip, a press release, something. I mean, it had to be set up. The students were experimenting with different designs and testing their prototypes using wind blown from a box fan and so on and so forth. And it became an opportunity to pitch the school renovation plan and all that kind of thing. And it just seemed to me, wow, 7th grade, and maybe a little late for game-based learning, but I don't know. I'm open. And lo and behold, a similar story pops up in the Hartford Current. I say, this can't be a coincidence, but maybe it is. There has to be something pushing this out. So this is on the Tuesday Hartford Current. The headline is, "Are Educational Video Games an Effective Classroom Tool?" Well, because I knew Matt was coming on the show, we were going to talk about education. Yeah, I think I'll read that. And it reads this way. It's sort of interesting. Peek inside your average classroom these days, and you're likely to see teachers using apps, websites, and software that borrow elements from video games to connect with students living technology-infused lives. By all accounts, they're fun to use. And studies have found that some can be effective, but there's also skepticism about how often students who use them are better educated or just better entertained. Dag Hammarskjöld. This is a Hartford Current.
Right.
Got it? Maybe you got the same press release. Dag Hammarskjöld, consumer sciences teacher, said she had been looking for a way to get more out of her students. Students have been more motivated and perform better in her classes since she began using Classcraft. That's a capital C. It's a proprietary app or tool or something. She began using Classcraft in the spring 2017. So I don't know how DAG gets in the Hartford Current.
What's an Associated Press article?
Associated Press article.
Yeah.
But how did Associated Press get it?
Well, we all share. So
Okay.
they must have seen our story and use that as part of their story.
No, I think this is a totally different
Okay, I'm just
Totally
guessing.
different. Yeah, totally. Because this is Classcraft. The other was Legos.
Okay.
Yeah. But here's kind of the point. I'm going to go to Matt for his view on it. To help educators identify programs with promise, the Johns Hopkins University Center for Research and Reform in Education launched a website that rates math and learning programs based on how they meet evidence standards for effectiveness under federal education law. The center's director, Robert Slavin, said there are some programs that have shown positive impacts, but on average, improvements are small. When people talk about technology transforming everything, it may in the future, but it's not there yet. Some question whether graphics, videos, and sound in so many programs are doing harm by teaching students to pursue the rewards, and so on and so forth. Matt, you got a view on any of this?
I'm not a big, video game player. I mean, I probably could get on and do okay. One thing I do like is that when they said Johns Hopkins is looking to do research to find out, can it improve? We need to do more of that with every single educational innovation that comes out there.
Could this be an example of sort of these faddish kinds of programs?
It could be, because you could be spending vast amounts of time and energy with your students, and they're happy, right? They're glad. They love playing those video games. But when you go to measure how much more they know, learn, or can use that information, and it's that much, then you just spent a ton of time improving their scores, or not even scores, but their achievement that much for all that time. Then you got to say to yourself, I'm sorry, but that particular app has to go, because it's not helping. You know what I mean? From a coaching point of view, I'll look at it from a coaching point of view. I have a lot of different tools when I do individual lessons with a kid. For you swinging a bat, you pitching, or something like that. The ones that don't work or help a kid improve control, velocity, breaking balls, and stuff like that. And believe me, I am inundated with stuff. Goes out the window, and I stick with the things that can actually show improvement in achievement.
The reason why I was teasing you a little bit, Ralph, is I think the education community, these are the manufacturers of stuff, and applications and all this new stuff that they make a lot of money on. I think sometimes they encourage, not necessarily Wallingford, but all across the country, school systems to sort of soften the ground with favorable publicity. Sure. So these games are more
Absolutely.
are more assumed to be valuable. But as Matt points out, you're turning off the educational spigots. You're turning down the educational spigots. You could be teaching something else, and instead you're playing a game. Presented this way in these kinds of articles, it seems so enlightened. It seems so wonderful. It seems so cutting edge. But I just question, whether, and I think Matt is making the
I do believe that it's not like I don't want to have any fun in the classroom. It's not like we don't do things that I think that the kids get turned on by. But I have to measure that up against and balance that out with that eventually this kid's going to have to write a paragraph, have to take a test, and have to be able to voice an opinion in class and back it up with some facts. Okay. And I don't know if an app can do that.
So let's change the subject again. You and I have been talking about 21st century teaching techniques, whatever that may be. It has been used as a reason to justify a major school renovation project. I like to use $150 million now, because after mission creep and construction costs and increases and the furniture, the fittings, and I'm just using that. Matt, any insight as to what is meant by 21st century teaching techniques, especially when you look back over your 36-year career?
Yeah. This I'm not as good at, but I can only tell you when we get professional development, they bring these things forward. What is 21st century?
Yeah.
I think it's a recognition that students need to be able to go beyond the 3 R's, and that they have to be able to use technology, and that we have to set up our classrooms that make the world more accessible. So there's going to be more use of the internet, more use of Google Classroom, and such. So I think it's a really, in some ways, it's a nebulous term. You know what I mean? Like, if you can ask 10 different people who are supposed to be educational experts what it means, and they're probably going to tell you like 8 different things. So it's hard for me to define it because I think it's hard for them to define it. But I think it's one of those things. What was the justice who says, I'll know it when I see it kind of thing? And that's why I think getting into the school, because I know that's where you're going to go, I think that they need to build a 21st century school because we're kind of teaching in not 21st century schools. But I know that's where you're going.
No,
You're
it
going
really
with yeah.
it might have been, but let's talk about that. So you teach American history,
U.S. history, yeah.
U.S. history.
Yep.
So how would students in your class, the way you teach it, benefit if you had something else
Yeah.
that qualifies as 21st
I'll
century?
give you one example.
Yeah, we need examples.
All right, I'll just give you one example. So when we teach World War II, you know, when you bring veterans in, like my father, who's like 95 years old, but I can't bring him in anymore. 'Cause, you know, come on, man.
Yeah.
But I went last year to New Orleans, and I went to the World War II Museum. And I started walking through it, and there were classes there. So, you know, I wasn't in school at the time. And I was like, man, I wish I could bring this to my students. I wish I lived in just outside of New Orleans, because I would have definitely bring my kids there. But the way that, and I talked to some of the teachers there, one woman said to me, you can bring it to your students, and here's how you do it. So one of the things that 21st century learning can do through the internet and through technology is to take something that's far away, like a World War II museum, and you can, as best you can, bring it into your classroom for those kids. But that's just one example. I'm not as well versed on it as I probably should be, and this being my retirement year, I'm kind of like, well, that's up to somebody else. But I think it's the idea that we have to think outside the box with these students and let them use the technology in an educational way, not in a faddish or app way that just distracts them.
Is it all about technology then?
There's a big portion of it, I think, that's technology. It's undeniable that you can't.
Because
get
I can
around
see
that.
technology being brought into the classroom without having to tear down the classroom and building another classroom.
Right, but the problem is in education, in my opinion, and this is from my experience on the council as well, retrofitting.
The Cheshire Town
Council.
Council. Yeah.
Retrofitting is not an answer, in my opinion. If you want to send a statement and you want to really set up the best environment for kids, go to Guilford High School, my alma mater, your alma mater. Have you seen their new school?
I have not.
For Christmas' sake, this is where their community says, you guys are important. And so there's certain things that go to the center of the school, like the library media and stuff like that. The classrooms are set up so they can access any information point that you want to, and that the science labs are up to date, and that the types of books that the kids can read, they don't have to open a book. They can go to a tablet and things like that. But I'm just scratching the surface. You would probably have to bring citizens to Guilford High School and have them walk around and say, this is how you send the message that this is really, really important. And that's why I think retrofitting is not an answer for me.
Well, what's the cause and effect with that sort of architectural change and student achievement?
I'm going to be honest with you, Mike. I can't guarantee you that student achievement is going to go through the roof because you build a new high school.
Because it seems one way one might interpret what you said, it's sort of symbolic. I mean, it is. I mean, and not to disparage Wallingford or anything like that. And my friend here is a fellow townie. It's the message you send to kids. It's the way the parents want. I've always said, like, why is there choke? Because people got together one day and said, this is the way we want a school to be. And so that's the way it was. And so my sense is that it's more than just the building itself. I think it's the way you're going to utilize your space, utilize your technology to maximize the achievement of those students. Just like if you said to me, Matt, if you had to redo Sheehan baseball field, what would you change? There are a lot of things I would change, but it would all be with this in mind. How am I going to get better baseball players out of it? How is this a better experience for them? Your thoughts on his thoughts?
Well, it sounds like, hearing Matt explain the need for new schools is resonating a little bit more with me than
How so?
Because he clearly is someone who has been in a classroom for 30 plus years. On one hand, he's not saying that everything today is better than it was years ago or vice versa. he seems to be coming at it from a neutral point of view, and in the end, he's describing an environment that I think I might want.
To pay $150 million for.
Well, no, I think there's a price tag. That's part, but I think,
What?
but I think this is better than. And listen, in all fairness to the school board, and
Right.
I did not see everything that was said, but
Yeah.
it's much better than saying to me, "Well, this all started when I realized I had to build new bathrooms at Sheehan High School, and I had to knock down walls, and then I had to knock down more walls." That's just not. That's not quite doing it for me, and so at least I'm a little more receptive now to the idea.
The other thing I would say, just being realistic, and I know you guys, I don't know if you agree with me or not, I just don't think it's ever going to happen that you're going to build one big high school in Wallingford. And
Yeah.
the main reason why I don't think they're going to do it is powder puff.
That was a perfect circle
Mike,
back.
I am
if
not.
you didn't do that,
You think
you
that
stole
I'm
my
kidding,
thunder.
don't you? I
That
am
is
not.
great.
You stole
kidding.
my
He's
thunder.
not kidding.
That's why this segment was last.
There's
So we
someday there's going to be 2 students going to Lyman Hall and 2 students going to Sheehan, and they're going to play each other on the field somewhere in the middle of town. I'm kidding.
So, you want to venture an opinion as to whether the one high school? Your thoughts on the one high
Dead
school
on
concept?
arrival. And mostly it's because I think that you've got your mayor, and I respect him. I'm on the other end politically than him, but I respect him. I think that he at the meeting, or one of the meetings that one of my friends was at, is that he has some pretty pertinent questions about how to fund it, how much it's going to cost, where's this all going, what's the eventually cost to the taxpayers, and that didn't seem to be like well vetted out. So I think if you took his lead, and usually he leads with what he thinks, that's where I think the whole thing goes. I think it's dead on arrival. It's unfortunate, though. It's very unfortunate.
Well, we got about 35 seconds. Let me just press the point a little bit. If you could have your way, we put the magic wand in your hand.
Yeah.
Is it better, and better is a very vague word, better for 2 high schools or better with one?
In this town, the way things are going, and
Yeah.
all things being equal, you need to go to one high school.
And that is because
The main reason is that you've got declining enrollments, that the money you're going to be spending too much money for 2 high schools, and there's going to be no need for two high schools when you could have one big, excellent high school. And I just think it'd be better for all the reasons I stated for having a new high school.
well, there goes Powder Puff.
Well, the juniors should play the seniors.
There goes Powder Puff.
Or you could play another town.
There goes
you
Powder
could play
Puff.
another
You guys
town.
just. Matt Altieri, thanks for coming on this Citizen Mike show. We had a heck
Honored to be here.
we had a heck of a good time, and our viewers appreciated it because they learned a bunch of stuff. Please come back. I have your phone number.
Yes.
You can run, but you can't hide. Thanks for watching the Citizen Mike show. We do appreciate it, folks. We're here on Wednesday evenings, but you can see the Citizen Mike show on WPA on Thursday, Fridays, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesdays at 9, or you can go to YouTube, the Citizen Mike Wallingford channel, or we can send you a link right to the shows after they're posted up on YouTube. Just let us know. Thanks to Matt Altieri, and thank you. Good night, everybody.